3 years after my wife passed away from what the doctors called a severe cardiac event, I finally hired a builder to fix the rotting weatherboards on the back wall of her old sewing room. I was just pulling into the car park at St. Andrew's Presbyterian in Christchurch when my phone rang. The voice on the other end belonged to the builder I'd hired, a steady, reliable man named Gary. But he didn't sound steady at all. "Mr. Callahan," he said, and I could hear something tight in his voice, something controlled, like a man trying not to alarm a child. "You need to come back to the house right now. I've found something inside this wall, something I think you need to see in person. And sir, please, don't bring anyone with you." I sat in that car park for a full 10 seconds, engine idling, the Sunday morning bells beginning to toll. Then I turned the car around and drove home. Thank you for being here and staying with me. Before we go further, drop a comment and let me know where in the world you're watching from. I genuinely love seeing how far these stories travel. And just so you know, this story contains some dramatized elements used to help explain the situation and carry the message. Any resemblance to specific individuals is unintentional, but the truth, at the heart of it, that I believe completely. My wife, Dorothy, had died on a Tuesday morning in April, 2 years before I'd hired Gary. The doctors at Christchurch Hospital told me it was sudden cardiac arrest. She was 61 years old. She had no prior heart condition on record, no warning signs I had noticed. One morning she was there, pouring her tea, asking me whether I'd remembered to ring the electrician, and by afternoon, she was gone. We had been married 38 years. Her sewing room had stayed locked since the day she died. I couldn't face it. It smelled of her, of the lavender sachets she kept in the drawer beneath her fabric stash, and of old wood and sunlight. Every time I walked past that door, something in my chest clenched tight and I kept walking. It was my son-in-law who finally mentioned the weatherboards. "Structural issue," he said over the phone. "Left too long, the water gets in and ruins the framing." I nodded and hired Gary without thinking much about it. Just a job that needed doing. When I got back to the house that Sunday morning, Gary's ute was still in the driveway. He met me at the side gate before I'd even reached the front door. He was a big man, Gary, broad-shouldered and usually unhurried. That morning he looked pale under his tan. "I'm sorry," he said. "I didn't know whether I should call or wait, but I think you'd want to know." He led me around to the back of the house and into Dorothy's sewing room through the French doors she'd always kept locked. The room had been opened, the furniture shifted, and the external wall partially stripped back where Gary had begun pulling the old weatherboards away from the outside. There was a gap now in the internal lining where he'd had to investigate the source of the water damage. And in that gap, wedged between the insulation bats and the framing studs, sat a waterproof document bag, sealed with a heavy Ziploc closure, bright red, the kind surveyors use on site. "It was deliberately placed," Gary said quietly. "Not just fallen in there, tucked in, right down behind the bottom plate. I almost missed it. My wife had hidden this." Dorothy, who had shared a bed with me for 38 years, who I had believed I knew entirely, had concealed something inside the walls of her own home and never said a word. I took the bag from Gary with hands that were not entirely steady. I thanked him and asked him to give me some time. He nodded, went back outside, and I heard him begin quietly packing up his tools. I sat down in Dorothy's old sewing chair, the one she'd recovered herself in a blue and cream fabric she'd bought at the market on Rickerton Road, and I opened the bag. Inside were 3 things. A USB drive, a notebook, small and spiral-bound, the kind you buy at a service station, with Dorothy's handwriting on the cover in black marker, for Raymond, if I'm gone. And beneath the notebook, an envelope sealed with tape, addressed in her careful capitals, "My name is Raymond. I am 64 years old, and until that morning, I believed my wife had died of a heart attack. I opened the notebook first. The first entry was dated 11 months before Dorothy died. Ray, she had written, if you're reading this, something has happened to me. I need you to know that I did not go peacefully. I have been trying to find out the truth for months. I haven't told you because I needed to be sure, and because I was frightened of what knowing might do to you. I turned the page. I found irregularities in the business accounts in June. Large transfers I didn't authorize. Moving through a company I don't recognize. I started to dig quietly. I found that our son-in-law, Marcus, had been skimming from Callahan Timber for at least 2 years. I confronted him in August. He smiled at me. Ray. He smiled, and he said I should be very careful about making accusations I couldn't prove. Then, he said something that has stayed with me since. Dorothy, you don't want to know how far this goes. My daughter, Claire, had been married to Marcus Hearn for 6 years. I had trusted him with my business. He'd come on board as a financial consultant 3 years earlier, at Claire's suggestion. And within a year, he was managing the accounts almost entirely. I turned the pages with shaking hands. October. My vitamins taste wrong. I mentioned it to Dr. Voss, and he waved it away. Ray. Dr. Voss was introduced to us by Marcus's business partner, Philip Dre. I think about that now. I think about it a great deal. November. I've been feeling confused. My hair is coming out in the shower. I can't think clearly some mornings. I know what this could mean, but I'm not ready to say it yet. January. I've been to see Carolyn Marsh. She's an old friend, a solicitor in Littleton, the one I used for my own affairs before I married you. She's kept everything I've brought her in a sealed file. She has instructions. If anything happens to me, she'll act in April. 12 months after my death. February. I confronted Marcus again. I told him I knew about the money, and I knew about Philip Dre's connection to Voss. He looked at me for a long time. Then he said, I wonder sometimes if you have a heart condition you don't know about yet. I am writing this down, Ray, because I want you to understand. I am not imagining this. I am not confused. Whatever happens to me, this is real. I lowered the notebook. The room was quiet. Outside, I could hear a tui somewhere in the garden, that odd liquid call Dorothy had always stopped to listen for. The recording on the USB drive was dated 3 weeks before she died. Her voice, when I clicked play on her old laptop, was thinner than I remembered. A little breathless. But it was her. Ray, I don't have much time left, I think. I can feel it. I want you to know, I'm sorry I kept this from you. I was trying to protect you. I wanted irrefutable proof before I brought you into it. If I didn't get there in time, Carolyn will. Everything I've collected is with her. The accounts, the transfers, the connection between Marcus and Philip Dre and Dr. Voss, the full picture. She'll open the file in April. 1 year after I'm gone. Please find her. Please don't let Marcus near the business or near Claire until you understand what he is. A pause. The sound of her breathing. I love you. I love you more than I was ever very good at saying. I should have said it more. You were always the best of it, Ray. All of it. The recording ended. I sat in Dorothy's sewing chair until the light changed in the room. Then I heard a car in the driveway. I looked out the window. It was Claire and Marcus, pulling in for their usual Sunday lunch. I had roughly 30 seconds. I pushed the USB drive and notebook back into the document bag and slid it beneath the cushion of the sewing chair. I pulled the French doors of the sewing room shut behind me, walked to the kitchen, and switched on the kettle. My hands were shaking. I pressed them flat on the bench until they stopped. Dad. Claire came through the back door with a loaf of bread and a look of easy cheerfulness that, in the last 10 minutes, had become unbearable to see. Gary? Still doing the weatherboards? He packed up for today, I said. Needed a part, Marcus came in behind her. He was a tall man, Marcus, with the kind of broad, easy confidence that could fill a room and make you feel glad of it. He clapped me on the shoulder. How are you getting on, Ray? Sleeping any better? Better and better, I said. We had lunch. Claire talked about her friend's new baby, a hen party she was organizing, the roses at the front of the house that needed cutting back. Marcus asked me twice, carefully and gently, whether I had thought any more about the offer to sell Callahan timber to a larger outfit. He'd been raising it for months. The business wasn't doing well, he said. The market had shifted. Better to get out while there was still value to extract. I told him I was still thinking about it. When they left, I stood at the door and watched Marcus's car back out of the drive. Then I went back inside, locked every door, and called a number I hadn't used in years. His name was Keith Farrow. We had been at school together in Rangiora, and he had spent 30 years in the New Zealand police, the last 10 in serious fraud. He'd retired 2 years earlier and gone into private consulting. I had his number because Dorothy had always said, if you ever need someone you can trust completely, ring Keith. At 8 the next morning, I was sitting in Keith's office in a converted villa in Sydenham, the document bag on the desk between us. Keith was 62, slightly heavier than I remembered from school, with the particular stillness of men who have spent decades listening carefully to people in difficult situations. He listened. He read. He played the recording twice. Then he set down his pen. Raymond, he said, your wife was a very careful, very brave woman, and I think you already know what I'm about to tell you. He turned his laptop screen toward me. Business registration records, financial filings, a web of company names and directorships that stretched from Christchurch through to Auckland and then offshore. At the center of it, like a spider at the middle of a web, was Marcus Hearn, connected through intermediaries to a financial services company in Singapore. The same Singapore company had paid substantial sums to a New Zealand account that resolved after 3 corporate layers, and Philip Dre was the man who had introduced Dr. Voss to our family. How much is missing from the timber business? I asked. Keith looked at me steadily. My initial read is somewhere between 1.8 and 2.4 million over 3 years. The room was very quiet. And Dorothy? I can't make that determination, he said, but I think you should talk to a doctor. Not Voss. Someone independent. And I think, he added, that your wife's solicitor may be very important in the weeks ahead. I found Carolyn Marsh in a small practice on Oxford Street in Littleton, overlooking the harbor. She was in her late 50s, sharp-featured, with the composed air of someone who had heard difficult things before and never been overwhelmed by them. She stood when I came in and took both my hands. I've been waiting to hear from you, she said. I was hoping it would be sooner. I was afraid of what might happen in the meantime. She brought me to her desk and opened a file that was several centimeters thick. Dorothy had been meeting with her for the better part of a year before she died. Every document she had managed to gather quietly, every screenshot of the business accounts she had photographed on her phone, every note she had written down, was here. A timeline of the fraud, background research on Philip Dre, who had 2 prior civil fraud proceedings in Australia, both settled quietly. A printed record of the payments flowing between Marcus's offshore entities, and at the bottom of the file, a new will, dated 3 weeks before Dorothy died. It removed Marcus Hearn as any beneficiary of the family assets, and directed that Callahan timber was to be placed in a trust managed independently, not by any family member's spouse. She was very clear, Carolyn said. She said if something happened to her and you didn't find the material in the sewing room, the sealed file was to be opened in April and delivered directly to you and to the police. She didn't want it to disappear. I looked at the file. She did all of this while she was being poisoned. Carolyn's expression was very controlled. She was a remarkable woman. Raymond. 3 days later, my bank sent me an alert. A transfer of $80,000 to an account I didn't recognize, authorized, according to the bank's records, by my signature on a document I had never seen. I rang the bank. The signature, when I examined it, was close. Very close. But the loop on the capital C in Callahan sat too high. I'd been signing that name for 64 years. I rang Keith. He said what I already knew. They were moving. The competency play would come next. It did. 2 days later, a letter arrived from a law firm I had never engaged, informing me that a petition had been filed with the family court to have a welfare guardian appointed for me, on the grounds of cognitive decline following the grief of losing my wife. The petition was supported by a statutory declaration from Dr. Voss and a letter from Marcus, describing a series of conversations in which I had apparently become confused, repetitive, and unable to manage my affairs. None of those conversations had occurred. I sat at Dorothy's kitchen table and read the letter twice. Then I folded it carefully, put it in my jacket pocket, and rang Carolyn. "I've been waiting for this," she said. Within 48 hours, Carolyn had filed a formal rebuttal with the court. She engaged an independent neuropsychologist, a woman named Dr. Patricia Sefton from the University of Canterbury, who assessed me over 2 sessions and produced a report stating clearly that I showed no signs of cognitive impairment of any kind. She also filed a formal complaint about Dr. Voss to the medical council, attaching Dorothy's notebook entries about the vitamins and her suspicion of his involvement with Philip Dre. Keith, meanwhile, had been working with a forensic accountant. The picture they assembled was meticulous and damning. Marcus had been systematically stripping Callahan timber through inflated contractor invoices, all paid to companies he controlled through offshore holding structures. He had begun the month after he joined the business. The estimated total loss, $2.2 million over 31 months. He had also taken out a $250,000 personal loan from the business, recorded in the accounts as a strategic development advance, with no repayment schedule and no board approval. Because Marcus had been managing the accounts, the entry had been designed to blend into the regular outgoings. Dorothy had found it. She had found it by accident while looking for a supplier invoice, and that discovery had set everything else in motion. The cardiac event had not been a stroke. I know this because I authorized a second autopsy 10 months after Dorothy's death. It was the hardest decision I have ever made. It felt like a second violation. I signed the consent form with my hands shaking and went home and sat in her sewing room for the better part of an afternoon. The forensic pathologist found elevated levels of a cardiac glycoside compound in preserved tissue samples. In sufficient quantities over a sustained period, it causes arrhythmia that presents on examination as sudden cardiac arrest. It is not routinely tested for in a standard post-mortem. If the attending physician is not looking for it, it is very easy to miss. Dr. Voss had been the attending physician. The cause of death was formally changed from cardiac event to homicide. I was eating toast in my kitchen when Keith rang with the result. I set down the toast and didn't pick it up again. I sat for a very long time. Dorothy had known. She had known she was being killed, and she had spent her remaining months collecting evidence instead of telling me, because she had been trying to protect me and trying to make the proof strong enough to hold. She had died doing that. The following week, I received a visit I had not invited. Philip Dre knocked on my door on a Thursday afternoon, unannounced. He was in his early 60s, well-dressed, with the particular smooth manner of men who have navigated difficult situations by being charming and patient. He said he wanted to talk about what he called a misunderstanding between Marcus and me. He said Marcus was worried about me, that grief did strange things to people, and that sometimes older men needed support they didn't know how to ask for. He said he hoped we could resolve things privately, family to family. I let him stand on the doorstep and asked what he wanted. He looked at me for a moment and then said, quite calmly, that it would be better for everyone, and particularly for my daughter, if I stepped back from whatever I thought I was pursuing. He said accidents happened to people who were distracted by grief and not paying attention to where they were going. I said I would keep that in mind and close the door. Then I rang Keith and told him everything, word for word. Keith told me not to be alone in the house that night. He came over himself and stayed in the spare room. I didn't argue. At 11 o'clock that night, my outdoor security sensor tripped. We watched the footage together the following morning. A figure in dark clothing moving along the side fence, trying the door of the garden shed before leaving the way they'd come. Professional enough not to force anything. Testing, not yet committing. Keith called a detective he knew at the Canterbury Police. A woman named Detective Senior Sergeant Aroha Ngata, who had worked financial crimes and knew Philip Dre's name from a prior investigation that had never resulted in charges. When Aroha sat down with Keith and me in my kitchen and reviewed the full picture, the fraud, Dorothy's notebook and recording, the forged bank transfer, the fraudulent court petition, the formal homicide finding, and now the security footage, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "This is going to the Serious Fraud Office and the Major Crimes Unit simultaneously." That was a Thursday. By the following Monday, the investigation had been formally opened. 3 weeks later, I was sitting in Carolyn's office when she looked at me over her reading glasses and said, "Raymond, we have a problem with Philip Dre. Everything connects to Marcus and Voss. The chain back to Dre has one more layer than we can currently reach. We need more." She set down her pen. "There is one possibility. The court petition hearing is in 2 weeks. All three of them, Marcus, Voss, and Dre, have been invited to give statements. If we can get them in a room together with their guard lowered, if you can make them talk to each other in a way that gives us what we need on Dre directly." "You want me to sit across from my daughter's husband," I said, "and the man who killed my wife and get them to incriminate themselves. I want you to let us do the work," Aroha said from the corner. "We need direct evidence connecting Dre to the initial targeting of your wife. We have the financial chain. We have the medical finding. But a confession, or even an admission, from one of them that puts Dre in the room at the beginning, that's what closes it completely." I thought about Dorothy, sitting in her sewing room, writing in her spiral-bound notebook, quietly building a case against the people who were killing her. I thought about the red document bag wedged behind the insulation bats, waiting for me. "All right," I said. "Tell me what you need." The week before the hearing, I rang Marcus and asked him to come for dinner, just the two of us. I said I wanted to clear the air before things got more complicated. I said I missed having family around the table. He said he'd come Friday. His voice was careful but not worried. Men like Marcus are often undone by their own confidence. That Friday, Aroha's team had the house fitted by 2 o'clock. Microphones in the kitchen, light fitting. In the lounge, ceiling rose. In the hallway, smoke alarm. A pinhole camera in the bookcase where Dorothy had kept her gardening books. A panic word. I was to say I'm just thinking of Dorothy. If things went wrong and I needed them in immediately. I set the table the way Dorothy would have. Good placemats, proper glasses, the serving plates she'd bought at the Christchurch Farmers Market. I cooked a lamb shoulder, because Marcus had always commented on my lamb. He arrived at 7. He shook my hand at the door with the ease of a man who didn't expect this evening to go badly for him. We ate. He talked about Claire, about a property project he was looking at in Queenstown, about the timber business. He pushed again, gently, on the sale idea. He said he was trying to protect my retirement security. He said he felt a responsibility toward me. given what had happened to Dorothy. I let him talk. Over dessert, I set down my spoon and said, "Marcus, I need to ask you something directly." He looked up. Something shifted behind his eyes, just slightly. Not alarm. Calculation. "The business accounts," I said. $2.2 million over 31 months. I've had it all verified by a forensic accountant. I know where it went. I know about the Singapore holding company and the contractor invoices. I know about your loan. I know all of it. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Ray, I think you've been given some very misleading information by people who have reasons to undermine me." "I also know about Philip Dre," I said, "and his connection to Voss." Marcus set down his wine glass. "Dorothy found the accounts," I said. "In June, 2 years ago. She confronted you, and then she became very ill, and then she died of what was recorded as a cardiac event, until a second autopsy changed that finding." He looked at me for a long time. "I don't know what you think you're doing, Ray," he said. "But whatever you've been told." "I'm not asking what I've been told," I said. "I'm asking you to tell me whether Philip Dre knew about Dorothy when he arranged the introduction to Voss. I want to hear it from you." Something changed in his face. The smoothness went out of it. "Philip said she was a problem," Marcus said, his voice low. "He said if she kept digging, she'd unravel everything and we'd both go to prison. He said Voss could manage it." The room was very quiet. "I didn't know what managing it meant," Marcus said. "Not at first. I thought it meant she'd be too sick to pursue it. I didn't." He stopped. "You didn't know she would die," I said. He looked at the table. "But when she did," I said, "you didn't go to the police." He still didn't speak. "She was Claire's mother," I said. "She was the woman who made you welcome in this house." Marcus put his face in his hands. Then the front door opened. Aroha came in with 2 constables behind her. "Marcus Hearn," she said, "I'm arresting you on charges, including financial fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, and as an accessory to homicide." Marcus looked up at me. For a moment I thought he was going to say something. Then he just looked away. "They found Dr. Voss at his home in Fendleton and arrested him the same night. Philip Dre was detained the following morning at Christchurch Airport with a one-way ticket to Singapore in his jacket pocket. The police had been watching him since Tuesday. The Serious Fraud Office took the business case. The Major Crimes Unit took the homicide. Marcus's interview under caution lasted 6 hours. Partway through, with his lawyer present, he gave a full statement. He said Philip Dre had approached him 8 years earlier, before Marcus had even met Claire, with a long-term proposition: find a well-capitalized family business through a personal connection, embed himself in the financial management, and extract the capital systematically while Dre's offshore structures handled the laundering. Dorothy had not been part of the original plan. When she began to investigate, Dre made the decision to involve Voss. Marcus said he had not known until Dorothy was already deteriorating what Voss was doing. I don't know entirely whether I believe him. I believe he was afraid of Dre. I believe he convinced himself that not knowing the details was the same as not being responsible. But my wife is still dead, and Marcus Hearn was in that house for 6 years, eating at that table, and he said nothing. The sentencing, 8 months later, came on a Thursday morning in October. The courtroom in Christchurch was bright and ordinary, fluorescent lights and wooden benches, the kind of room where consequential things happen without ceremony. Philip Dre received 14 years on the lead charge of conspiracy to commit murder, with additional years cumulative for the fraud and money laundering charges. He showed no expression. Dr. Voss received 12 years. He looked much older than he had at Dorothy's funeral, where he had shaken my hand and told me she had been a wonderful patient. Marcus received 9 years on the fraud charges and 5 years concurrent as an accessory after the fact to homicide. Claire was not in the courtroom. I hadn't expected her to be. She had not spoken to Marcus since his arrest, but she had also not been able to come. I understood that. I sat in that courtroom and waited for something to lift from my chest. It didn't, entirely. But something settled. The month after the sentencing, the court ordered Callahan Timber to be released from the fraud proceedings and placed into the independent trust Dorothy had specified in her revised will. I kept it running with a general manager I trusted and stepped back from the day-to-day. Carolyn organized a gathering at her office the week after sentencing. Keith was there. Aroha, the forensic accountant. We drank tea and ate shortbread and didn't say very much. It didn't need a great deal of ceremony. Claire rang me that Sunday. We talked for nearly an hour, the first real conversation we'd had in months. She cried. I cried. She said she had known something was wrong with Marcus in the last year of her mother's life, but hadn't known what, hadn't let herself look directly at it. I told her that was not the same as what Marcus had done. She said she wasn't sure she believed that yet. I said I thought that was honest, and I loved her very much. It was a beginning. I renovated Dorothy's sewing room in November. I kept her sewing chair, recovered in the blue and cream fabric she had chosen herself. I put her gardening books on the shelf where the camera had been. I framed the last photograph taken of us together, a summer evening at Akaroa, and put it on the windowsill where the light hit it in the morning. I still talk to her sometimes. In that room, I don't expect an answer, but the talking helps. Keith and I walked together on Tuesday mornings, out along the Heathcote River and back through the reserve. We don't always talk about much. It's enough to have the company. I started volunteering at a community legal clinic that helps older New Zealanders navigate disputes over estates and financial matters. I sit across from people who are frightened and confused and who have had trust broken in ways they did not see coming, and I try to help them understand what they're looking at and what they can do. It's not nothing. Dorothy would have found it useful work. I keep her notebook in the top drawer of my desk. Not to look at often, but to know it's there. The last entry, the one she wrote in February, the month before she died, ends like this. I keep thinking about the morning we drove to Kaikoura, and it was so foggy we could barely see the road. But we just kept going slowly and trusted we'd come out the other side. I think that's what this is. Keep going slowly. Trust it clears. It does clear. Not all at once, not without cost, but it clears. If you are watching this and something in your own life feels wrong, something in the accounts, something in the health of someone you love, something in the behavior of a person who has positioned themselves close to your family's resources, do not wait. Do not assume it is paranoia. Dorothy's instinct was correct from the beginning. She was simply too careful, too protective, too determined to have irrefutable proof before she spoke. There is a version of events in which she told me in June and we acted together and she lived. I am not angry at her for not choosing that. She was trying to protect me, but I want you to hear this clearly. Speak sooner. Tell someone you trust. The proof can be gathered with help. You do not need to carry it alone. The people closest to us are not automatically safe. Trust is something you build and maintain and sometimes, painfully, revoke. That is not cynicism. That is wisdom. Dorothy knew that. She just ran out of time to act on it. Love fiercely. But pay attention. The two are not in conflict. The most loving thing you can do for the people who depend on you is to stay alert. Stay clear-eyed. And when something is wrong, say so. If this story stayed with you, leave a comment and let me know what it brought up for you. And if you know someone who needs to hear it, share it with them. Thank you for staying until the end.